I'm happy to talk, and I'm talking and as the an IUCN expert, and this work has been done with a whole team, including François Simard, who is a former IUCN Ocean Program director. And before going on, I just wanted to say 2 words about these things we are doing. And first of all, perhaps some of you are not very familiar with the IUCN. And I like to say that the IUCN is an old lady of the conservation work and world community, because it was, created in 1948. And IUCN is a very special organization because, you have member states, more than 90, and then you have the big NGOs like, WWF, TNC, and CI, etc. Many small NGOs as well dealing with the environment, and you have 10,000 commission members, of which I belong to. And this commission is dealing with the ecosystem approach, and particularly the focus for coastal and marine ecosystems. And we have built a special group dealing with the aquaculture. So this work we've been doing with the IUCN has started a long time ago. And François Simard, who was working at the IUCN, was convinced that aquaculture must be taken into account. And if we look at the production of aquaculture compared to fisheries, you see the recent development, and you can sort of see, the more and more important portion of seafood which is actually coming from aquaculture. And so if you look at this aquaculture development and also the main issues we have related to climate issues and biodiversity losses, etc., the need for protection areas, and including the last coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, you have this evidence that we have to find a way where aquaculture is included with the marine conservation issues, and we have to find a common way to go to reconcile the both sectors. Although, yes, we acknowledge that among the past 10, 20 years, etc., you've had many negative examples of aquaculture development, which were done with very negative impacts towards the environment and also the social issues as well. So with François, we have started to work on sustainability related to aquaculture, but also this first group we made was back in 2015, and we had this group of experts, and we tried to identify synergies that could be done with aquaculture and marine protected areas, because you have the situations where you have marine protected areas where you have different activities which are allowed if they have these activities are compatible with the protection issues, and aquaculture may be part of those activities. So we have started to look at how aquaculture could be included into the management of a marine protection area, and we produced the first deliverable. And then we going a little bit after this first collective talk, we said, okay, it has also to be very much related to contextual situation, identification of specific. You may have global objectives, but then you have to deal with these global objectives on a local basis. And so we have started to build this collection of study cases that you can find online, all available with these 4 deliverables we made on study cases where you have the cohabitation of aquaculture productions and a marine protected area or many protected areas. So here are the list of those cases. And basically here we try to describe what is the MPA, the conservation issues, how it is actually managed, what is the activity of aquaculture you have in the vicinity of the MPA, and sometimes within the MPA perimeter. And then we try to see what are the interactions, positive and negative. And the conclusion of this work was the first analysis, difficult to read, but if you go to the link of Zanzibar, you'll see you have a SWOT matrix which start to see at the weaknesses, but also the opportunities that you may have between aquaculture and marine conservation, saying basically that there is a common way to go to reconcile the both types of sectors. So here are the different cases. Tunisia, which is a cage culture system, which is quite sometimes critically seen, and then Indonesia, where you have a shrimp polyculture system within a mangrove area. So again, something which is quite sensitive. And then the French Polynesia case, where you start to see some kind of aquaculture, which is really an alternative to fishing. And here the species is the giant clam. And to decrease this giant clam, they have in fact started to make a small production of this clam, and also they have defined a marine protected area around the whole system. So interesting and different situation. And then we have so you have those deliverables, but we have started to go on and start to look at nature-based solution with the production of 2 deliverables, 1 report, which is here, which you can find online, and then this very recent publication, which is about the Zanzibar case, seaweed farming, using the nature-based solution global standard made by the IUCN. So I'm going just to come back to those last recent deliverables. Also to mention that this work was presented at the session of the last Impact 5 in Vancouver, and we had discussion, and we shared our results with other actors, including academic actors, but also including non-profit organizations such as TNC, who's very active also in this field of a new way of looking at aquaculture and what they call restorative aquaculture as well, or conservation aquaculture. So back to here, what we've done is to look at the nature-based solution concepts, principles, and then the last and recent edited global standard made by the IUCN. So you may find everything available on the in publications, and you have to keep in mind that the nature-based solution, the concept, has been emerging since the years 2000, 2010, and it was really promoted by the IUCN at the World Congress in Hawaii. It was in 2016. And with the definition, which is the IUCN definition, you may have other definition, for instance, for the World Bank or the OECD, slightly different definition. And for the IUCN, nature-based solutions are really, to face these emergencies that we have related to climate change issues, but also the biodiversity losses. So nature-based solutions are actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore, by key point also, natural and modified ecosystems in ways that address societal challenges, important to keep in mind, effectively, adaptively, and to provide both human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So that's the definition which is now used by the IUCN, and in my work, in the work we are carrying out, this is our reference. And then the IUCN decided to, because there were different interpretation of nature-based solution, they said we need to have some kind of a framework to make sure that we are on the right tracks in terms of development of initiatives for nature-based solutions. So this is the global standard And these global standards, you have here 8 main criteria. It's been a long work with all the IUCN experts to actually edit it. And you have 8 main criteria, which are listed here. And among each of these criteria, you have a list of different, some kind of indicators or at least questions to be addressed if you want to see that your potential NBS is on the right track. So we have this in we had this, and just keep in mind this, and go to Dr. Emmanuel Cohen-Sacham, who was really behind all this work with the IUCN. We were lucky enough to have her to talk during the impact session, and she presented the whole story of NBS. And this global standard allows the evaluation of one solution, and it comes out, then the outcome is a sort of a scoring between, the green one is good, judged, evaluated as good, and then sometimes it could be evaluated as very insufficient, and then, the solution is said to be not addressing the global standard, and something has to be done actually to make it more within the framework of NBS. So we used this framework and decided to apply it to places where you had a component of aquaculture, and sometimes the potential consideration of aquaculture, could it be part of an NBS, or could it be considered as an NBS? And back to this. So the first criteria is societal challenges. So what you have to address is the fact that your solution, what you think is a solution to address our big issues today, you have to target it towards specific societal challenges. And so here we go. Those societal challenges are the one here listed, 7. The IUCN work, identified 7. So climate change, disaster risk reduction, economic, social development, human health, food security, water security, environmental degradation, and biodiversity loss. And so if you think at the stories of aquaculture development, recent stories, but also traditional stories about aquaculture development, the production of aquaculture, most of the time, those development of aquaculture have been done in having in mind economic and social development, and sometimes just economic development, not very much in social development. So plus and minus, this has to be looked at in depth. And then climate change, well, aquaculture productions may be very vulnerable to climate change because of the changes in coastal ecosystems, and just the pure the intrinsic nature of aquatic animals, for instance, very much depending on water temperature or water quality. But sometimes also aquaculture could play a positive role towards climate change issues, mitigations, and for instance, algal, the cultivation of algae may be considered as a potential tool to mitigate and to be a blue carbon sink. Then food security, of course, is most of the time quoted as a potential target for aquaculture, but in many cases now you see aquaculture is mainly devoted to pure export market, and the food security may be criticized, in fact, and water security as well for inland aquaculture. It could be something to investigate, and then of course environmental degradation and biodiversity loss. So just by addressing this first criterion, we see that we have to have a deep look at what and how is designed the aquaculture system that you want to look at. And then the second criteria, not the second, the criteria 3, but the criteria 2 is about the scaling potential. So it means that you have to deal with a local, very specialized solution, but also you have to take into consideration the potential upscaling of this solution. And the criteria 3 is related to biodiversity. And this is a very important thing to consider for nature-based solution, because behind this NBS, we have now, the idea of switching for the transition from one economy which is devoted to decreasing our impacts and a sort of a relative decoupling of negative impacts towards the environment. But for nature-based solution, we are entering a new way of looking at solution, and we have to provide positive evidence of a positive impact towards the biodiversity. So for aquaculture, it's going to be quite a challenge to do that, because as the figure shows you, you have most of the time the aquaculture projects which are actually designed to minimize the impacts towards the environment, minimize the effluence, minimize any external negative influence they may have, and also the place where it is located, etc., etc. So, but going for positive impact is something new, and we had started to see it in our work. We're looking at marine protected areas and aquaculture projects, and in fact, this just 2 pictures give you some way to go, and sometimes because it has to be documented if you want to give evidence of a positive impact. And for instance, these pictures of dolphins, it's around the sea cages in Tunisia, and it's really close to the marine protected area of the Kyriat Islands. So those species are protected. And in fact, the mammals are attracted to the cages because of these organic matters, because of the upbuilding of a sort of a small and short trophic chain. So whether it's positive or negative for the overall biodiversity for the ecosystem, I cannot tell you, but for sure it has to be documented as a potential positive effect. And then the second picture gives you a picture of this work made in Polynesia, where actually, they are planting and replanting and following the population of giant clam, including the wild population. So it's a positive impact too of this cultivation farm. If you want to go further with this, looking at positive impacts, you have in fact to include all these concepts related to ecosystem services, and look at how aquaculture can actually be part of all these different ecosystem services that you have in coastal areas, and maybe contributing to, for instance, nutrient regulations or habitats for some wild species, like it is documented now with some oyster reefs, oyster productions, or mussel productions. So all these things may help, in fact, to have a further look at the notions, the concept of ecosystem services. In the one other example of criteria is the criteria of economic. So it's whether the nature-based solution has to prove evidence of a viable economic system behind it. And here I take this as an example of the seaweed farming in Zanzibar, because seaweed farming, you consider, it's very low impact aquaculture production. So dealing with the women, so many very, very interesting social positive impacts. But the system, the whole economic system, is based upon the export of sun-dried seaweeds to the Western countries, and the added value for the people involved, like this woman, is very low. And so perhaps there is a way, to improve the system by making more added value locally in Zanzibar, by having, for instance, as you see, the production of artisanal soap, which is actually sold to the tourists visiting Zanzibar. So again, here, some way to improve the system. We have also in Zanzibar, we had this workshop we made with the stakeholders, and among the criteria for a nature-based solution, there is a need to have the right governance system, which has to be inclusive, and from the local people up to the national people in charge of, for instance, the ministries of agriculture and fisheries and so on. So again, here it might be very challenging to get a system which is actually transparent and inviting all the stakeholders to take part, positive, an active part to it. We have also, as we identified for Zanzibar, we have also to find, proper trade-offs between different, sometimes things which are contradictory, like, for instance, the development of aquaculture and the communities, the conservation issues, and other activities such as tourism and so on. So, it's a whole challenge to focus on the middle of it, where you have this green potential combination of aquaculture, communities, and conservation. But if you look at these cases in detail, you start to see that there are potential ways to find aquaculture compatible with conservation objectives, with the flora, fauna restoration, alternative way to overfishing, which is a really important factor, and all the things I have already mentioned, that like ecosystem services, etc. So if we look as a way to conclude on our topic on nature-based solution as applied to aquaculture, we found out that this work actually was very much related to all the sustainability work made on aquaculture. And, there are many other things which are actually investigated at the moment in the aquaculture field to improve its general overall sustainability. Perhaps the main umbrella is the ecosystem approach for aquaculture, which is very much in the principles also of nature-based solution. You get to have this ecosystem approach, holistic, including the social issues. I like to talk about the concept of social ecological system, where the human activities are part of the system and fully integrated into it. But you have to include also other concepts such as community-based aquaculture or development, and inclusiveness, social license, social acceptability, stakeholder participation, etc., etc. So all these things towards a better sustainability of the aquaculture project. And we think now we are quite convinced that this NBS concept and global standard can help perhaps to improve the sustainability of existing aquaculture productions, but also it may help in pioneering new types of aquaculture projects, which may become specifically designed as NBS, means targeting multi-objectives and goals, and including not only food security, but also some, for instance, environmental issues and as well, etc. So just I give you a few examples. We had this discussion. It may be a way also to look at traditional systems and savoir-faire. And for instance, one thing we like to have investigated is the case of the restoration of traditional aquaculture coastal ponds in Hawaii. And here, you have really a high degree of involvement of the local communities, the indigenous, and it it's becoming very important. It's also cultural, but it's also food security, and also perhaps, you know, the restoration of some flora, for instance, but playing a role perhaps also against the storms. Then we have a traditional, very interesting system in Italy. When you see all these big, extensive ponds, production of finfish, but it's part of a Natura 2000 place, and you know it's playing quite a role in the water quality for the overall lagoon close to Venezia. Play a role also for the birds, wild birds, the migration. So interesting case also to investigate. And then you start to see also this new system of aquaculture production, which is the integrated multi-trophic aquaculture systems, where maybe those systems could be qualified as NBS themselves, because you know they are trying to reproduce the natural functions, and also minimize the environmental impacts, but taking advantage of the production influence towards another. So another potential case. And then I like to conclude on this perfect example of something new, perhaps coming up. And for instance, this is made in the south of Spain on a very little scale, but maybe it's also the future to think, you know, like it's a restoration, very famous restaurant, and they have started to work on the cultivation of zostera, which are aquatic plants. And zostera can play a role definitely for the carbon sequestration and water quality. And but in fact, you know, these zostera can also give a small grain, which is that you could compare to a potential rice, a seafood rice, and which is used now by this restaurant in the south of Spain. So maybe it's also the future, you know, to look at new solutions where you combine things, and perhaps it is also now to be considered as a nature-based solution. So here we go. Thanks for your attention, and I'll be very happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Raphaëla. That was a really interesting talk, and I have a number of questions, but I'm going to pass it over to some other folks. Just if we could pause the recording now, that would be great. Much appreciated. That really gives us a good insight here